Today we're going to talk about the bones of the skull. We have 8 cranial bones and 14 facial bones. We're going to start with the cranial bones. We have single bones and paired bones. The single bones, we have 4 of them. We're going to start with the single bones. This is the frontal bone, which lies in the front. The second one is the ethmoid bone, which is right here. You can see it from the inside. The third one is the sphenoid bone, which is right here, the sphenoid bone. And the last one is in the back, which is the occipital bone. And then we have the paired bones, and these are 2 paired bones. It means we have 4 of them. Let's take a look right here. We have the parietal bone right here, and the same in the other side here. And we have the temporal bone, and again the same on the other side. So we have a total of 8 cranial bones. We're going to say them again. First, at the front we have the frontal bone. The inside we have the ethmoid bone here. The ethmoid bone. And we have the sphenoid bone right here in the middle, which is butterfly shaped. So 1, 2, 3. We have the occipital bone at the back, number 4. And then we have the parietal bone, 5. And another one at the other side, 6. Temporal bone at 2 sides, this is 8. So this is the frontal bone from the outside, and you can also see it from the inside. Right here, this is the frontal bone, and this is in between the ethmoid bone. If you continue here, this is the frontal bone, this is the sphenoid bone, this is the sphenoid bone, and right here we have the temporal bone, and right here we have the occipital bone. A side view, we have the parietal bone, as you can see here, the cap continuation. This is the parietal, and this is the continuation of it on the side. This is the frontal, and this is right here the continuation of the frontal. And right here we can see a part of the sphenoid bone, the greater wing of the sphenoid bone. And this is the occipital bone from the outside. So now we're going to talk about the sutures of the skull. And a suture is the junction between 2 bones. So the site where 2 bones connect is called a suture. First, we have right here, between the frontal and the 2 parietal bones, we have one suture that is called the frontal suture or the coronal suture. So this is the one separating or connecting the frontal bone with the 2 parietal bones. Okay. The second one is this one, and it's called the sagittal or the mid-sagittal suture. okay, and it's connecting the two parietal bones. This is the one, sagittal suture. And we have one at the back of the skull, and it's called the lambdoid suture. The lambdoid suture, which is connecting the two parietal bones posteriorly to the occipital bone. Now we are looking at the skull from the back. Okay, this is the skull. We're looking from the back. As we said before, this is the lambdoid suture. So this is the continuation of the lambdoid suture. Okay, lose the cap. So now we're looking from this side. Okay, this is the lambdoid suture. Okay, and here this suture is called the occipital-mastoid suture because it is the area of connection between the occipital bone and the mastoid bone. Here we have the mastoid process. Okay, so it's the occipital-mastoid suture. And then we have this long suture right here that looks like an S. This is called the squamous suture. The squamous suture, or the temporoparietal suture. The temporoparietal suture. So after the squamous suture or the temporoparietal suture, this small area has a lot of names right here, but it's easy. Here we have the sphenoid bone. Here we have the frontal bone. Here the parietal, and this is the temporal bone. So the suture that is situated between the sphenoid bone and the temporal bone is called the sphenotemporal suture. Okay? And the suture situated between the sphenoid bone and the parietal bone is called the sphenoparietal suture. And between the sphenoid bone and the frontal bone, this one is called the frontal sphenoid suture. Okay, so sphenotemporal suture and the sphenoparietal and frontal sphenoid suture. Here I'm showing you the other side of the skull with no colors, with no letters written on the skull. So now you can pause the video and test yourself. Name the bones right here and right here. Name the sutures that you can see right now. So pause the video and test yourself. So a quick recap. This is the frontal bone lying at the front of the skull. These are the two parietal bones, and the one on the back right here is called the occipital bone. Right here we have the continuation of the frontal bone. So this is the frontal bone, this is the boundaries of the frontal bone. This is the continuation of the parietal bone. This is the temporal bone. This small one is the sphenoid bone. This is the mastoid. Okay. From the inside we can see the frontal bone here. We can see in between the ethmoid bone. We can see the sphenoid bone, the butterfly shape. We have the temporal bone. We have the occipital bone. And as for the sutures, we have the coronal or the frontal suture, and we have the sagittal or the mid-sagittal suture. And the one in the back, the V-shaped, this is the lambdoid suture. Okay, this is the lambdoid. Here from the back, this is the V-shaped lambdoid. This is the continuation of the lambdoid suture. Okay. This suture in green is between the occipital bone and the mastoid, which is called the occipito-mastoid suture. This long suture that is like an S-shaped suture called the squamous suture or the temporoparietal, suture. And here I'm holding the cap along with the skull to allowing you to imagine that this is the parietal bone and this is the continuation from this side, okay? And this is the frontal bone and this is its continuation on a side view, okay? So as we said that this is the squamous suture. Now this small area, this is the continuation of the coronal suture or the frontal suture, okay? Here between the sphenoid bone and the temporal bone, we have the sphenotemporal suture. Between the sphenoid and the parietal, we have the sphenoparietal suture. And between the frontal bone and the sphenoid, we have the frontosphenoid suture. Now we're going to talk about the facial bones. We have 14 facial bones. We have 6 paired bones and we have 2 single bones. Okay, we're going to start with the paired bones. First of all is the lacrimal bone, which is situated right here. This is the lacrimal bone. We have the nasal bones. We have the zygoma or the zygomatic bone right here. This is the zygomatic bone. We have the maxilla or the maxillary bone right here. Okay. We have, let's see from the, this is an inferior side. This is the palate, the palatine bones right here, the palatine bones. And we have the last paired bone is called the inferior nasal conchae. But right here, I don't think that we can see it, but it's like inside right here. We have the inferior nasal conchae paired, 2 on each side. Okay, so the lacrimal on both sides, nasal on both sides, zygoma or the zygomatic bone on each side, the maxilla, the palatine bones, and the inferior nasal conchae. It looks like I'm taking a swab for a coronavirus test. And then we have the single bones. We can see one right here, which is the vomer bone. This is the one. This is the vomer. And we have the mandible.